Okay, let's go. Hello, guys. Welcome to this first episode in English of the RouksCast. Welcome to this episode dedicated to one of the most powerful yet most misunderstood psychological skills acceptance. I'm delighted to accompany you today on this exploration that combines neuroscience, clinical psychology, and practical wisdom. When we talk about acceptance, people often mistakenly think it means resignation, passivity, or giving up in the face of difficulties. But it's precisely the opposite. Acceptance is an active, dynamic process that requires courage and lucidity. It's recognizing reality as it is, without distorting its source or emotional features, while maintaining our capacity for action. So today we are going to dissect this fascinating concept from multiple angles. We'll first explore the neurological basis of acceptance, what literally happened in your brain when you resist or accept a situation. Then we'll dive into the psychological theories that have revolutionized and understanding of acceptance, particularly acceptance and commitment therapy. Then we'll see how to cultivate this skill in daily life with concrete, scientifically validated exercises. What makes acceptance so crucial is its measurable impact on how mental and physical health. Hundreds of studies show that people who practice psychological acceptance exhibit lower levels of chronic stresses, better emotional regulations, and even improved immune function. Conversely, chronic resistance to reality is strongly correlated with anxiety, depression, and burnout. So imagine your mind as a house with windows. Resistance is closing the shutters hoping the storm doesn't exist. Acceptance is opening the windows, observing the storm, understanding its nature, and taking appropriate measures. You don't control the weather, but you keep control over your response. So settle in comfortably, whether you're currently going through a difficult period or simply seeking to better understand your psychological functioning. This journey into the mechanism of acceptance will provide you with concrete, scientifically grounded keys to transform your relationship with human experience. So, we're gonna talk about the first part, the neurological foundation. To truly understand acceptance, let's start with what happens in your brain when you're confronted with an unpleasant situation. The resistance secrets. So, when something doesn't match your expectations, several brains regions activate simultaneously. The amygdala, the small album-shaped structure located in the limbic system, detects the threat or incongruence. It functions like an hypersensitive smoke detector, capable of reacting in just milliseconds. And so this activation triggers a cascade of reactions. The hypothalamus stimulates the production of cortisol and adrenaline by the adrenal glands. Your sympathetic nervous system races, cardiac acceleration, muscle tension, pupil dilatation. It's the famous fight or flight response, an evolutionary heritage that allows us to survive facing predators. But here's the problem. This system hasn't evolved to handle modern psychological stressor. Your amygdala can't tell the difference between a charging lion and an unpleasant email from your boss. It activates the same alarm secrets. So the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, located just behind your forehead, then attempts to regulate this emotional response. It's the seat of your reasoning and regulation capacity, but when the amygdala is highly activated, it can literally inhibit prefrontal function. This is called amygdala hijacking, a concept developed by psychologist Daniel Goleman. Functional neuroimaging studies showed that when participants actively resist a negative emotional experience, we observe hyperactivation of the default mode network, notably the anterior cingulate cortex and medial prefrontal cortex. This hyperactivation is associated with rumination, that repetitive internal dialogue, where you constantly replay the situation asking yourself, why me? Or how could this happen? And so now let's observe what happens neurologically when practicing acceptance. It's really fascinating. Research conducted by Sarah Laura's team at Harvard has shown that regular practice of acceptance, particularly through mindfulness meditation, structurally modifies the brain. We observe thickening of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the insula, two regions crucial for self-awareness and emotional regulation. The insula deserves special attention. It's a region that processes internal body signals, what we call interoception. When you practice acceptance, you develop your capacity to perceive your physical sensations and emotions without automatically reacting to them. The insula thickens, creating a kind of response space between stimulus and your reaction. A remarkable study published in the Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience compared brain's activity of people practicing acceptance when faced with negative images versus those attempting to suppress those emotions. Result? The group practicing acceptance showed reduced amygdala activation and better connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. In other words, they maintaining executive control despite this negative stimulus. The key concept here is neuroplasticity. Your brain reconfigures itself based on your repeated experience. Each time you practice acceptance rather than resistance, you strengthen certain neural circuits and weaken others. Think of acceptance as creating a new path through a dense forest. At first, you have to struggle through difficulty on the brush. But by repeatedly taking this path, it becomes a clear, easily accessible route. Meanwhile, the whole path of resistance gradually closes. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson has demonstrated that just 8 weeks of mindfulness practice are sufficient to observe the measurable change in baseline brain activity. Participants showed greater activation of the left prefrontal cortex, as region associated with positive emotions and approach rather than avoidance. Acceptance also profoundly influences your autonomic nervous system. This comprises two branches, the sympathetic, which activates, and the parasympathetic, with source. Chronic resistance maintains the sympathetic system in permanent alert, which literally exhausts your organism. Acceptance activated the vagus nerve, the main component of the parasympathetic system. Vagal tone, which can be measured with heart rate variability, is an indicator of your capacity for emotional self-regulation. People with high vagal tone recover more quickly from stress and demonstrate more psychological flexibility. Studies showed a simple 3 minutes acceptance exercises can significantly reduce skin conductance, a marker of sympathetic nervous system activation. So your body physiologically calms down. What's remarkable is that these neurological changes aren't just correlated with psychological well-being, they predict it. In other words, by modifying your neural patterns through acceptance practice, you create the biological conditions for better mental health. Right? So we're gonna start the second part about the psychological models. Now that we understand what happens in the brain, let's explore the theoretical frameworks that have revolutionized our approach to acceptance in clinical psychology. Developed in the 90s by Stephen Hayes, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, represents a true revolution in treating psychological disorders. Unlike traditional approaches that aim to reduce or eliminate symptoms, ACT proposes something radical. What if the problem wasn't the suffering itself, but our struggle against it? Hayes used a powerful metaphor, quicksand. The more you struggle in the quicksand, the faster you think. The only way to survive is to spread your body across the surface. Get contact with the sand and move slowly and deliberately. This is exactly what ACT proposed for difficult psychological experience. The model rests on 6 fundamental processes that form what's called psychological flexibility. First process, acceptance itself, defined as voluntary openness to internal experiences, even unpleasant ones, without attempting to modify or avoid them. Second process is cognitive diffusion. This is learning to observe your thoughts and passing mental events rated in absolute truth. You are not your thoughts. When your mind says, I'm worthless, it's just a thought, not an objective reality. The third process is self as context. You are neither your thoughts, nor your emotion, nor your social roles. You are the consciousness that observes all of this. It's the observing self, rated and a conceptualized self. The fourth process is being present. That is, developing mindfulness of the present moment. Most of our suffering comes from living in our head, rehashing the past and anxiously anticipating the future. The fifth process is values. These are your directions you want to give your life, your guiding precepts. ACT insists on the crucial distinctions between values and goals. A goal can be achieved. A value is the permanent direction. Sixth process is committed action. Accepting doesn't mean remaining passive. It's acting in coherence with your values, even in the presence of difficulties. Meta-analyses grouping hundreds of studies confirm ACT's effectiveness for a wide range of disorders: anxiety, depression, chronic pain, addiction, post-traumatic stresses. The average effect size is comparable to or even superior to classic cognitive behavioral therapies. Jamie Gross, a psychologist of Stanford, has developed an emotional regulation model that eliminates with acceptance works so well. He distinguishes several regulation strategies according to when they intervene in the emotional process. Expressive suppression, for example, consists of masking the expression of an already present emotion, putting on a brave face when sad. The problem? Studies show this strategy paradoxically increases physiological stress activation and impairs memory. You seem calm on the surface, but your body remains in maximum alert. Cognitive reprisal, on the other hand, intervenes earlier in the process. It's reinterpreting the situation to modify its emotional significance. This strategy is more effective but requires a lot of cognitive effort and isn't always possible. Acceptance is positioned differently. It doesn't seek to modify the situation or the emotion, but the relationship you have with the experience. This is what Gross calls a meta-strategy. Rated and regulating specific emotions, you modify your fundamental posture toward all emotions. An elegant study compared these strategies in the laboratory. Participants watched a stressful film using either suppression or acceptance. Those practicing acceptance showed less blood pressure, less salivary cortisol, and recovered more quickly after viewing. Especially, they didn't show the rebound effect observed in suppressors, an intensification of negative emotions once suppressions was released. Here is something fascinating. Accepting a negative experience often reduces its intensity and duration. It's the acceptance paradox. By ceasing to fight against an emotion, it loses its grip on you. This paradox has been experimentally demonstrated repeatedly in a study on social anxiety. Participants who received instructions to accept their anxiety before public speaking reported less anxiety and performed better than those who tried to control their nervousness. Why this paradox? Several mechanisms are at work. First, fighting against an emotion creates a second arrow, as Buddhists say, the suffering of suffering. You didn't just have the primary emotion, but also the distress of having this emotion, the shame, the frustration. Then, attempting to suppress a stroke of emotion creates the suppression rebound effect, brilliantly demonstrated by Daniel Wagner. If it's tell you, don't think about a pink elephant, what do you immediately think of? The very effort of suppression makes the element momentarily accessible. So finally, acceptance diffuses emotional escalation. Emotions are temporary processes that peak then naturally descend if we don't fuel them through rumination or avoidance. By accepting, you let the emotion follow its natural courses. John Kabat-Zinn developed the MBSR program, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which has become one of the most studied protocols in clinical psychology. With over 4,000 published studies, we now have a solid understanding of how mindfulness cultivates acceptance. Mindfulness is defined as intentional attention to the present moment, without judgment. This without judgment is crucial. Normally, we instantly categorize our experience, good, bad, a pleasant, unpleasant, to keep, to reject. Mindfulness temporarily suspends this automatic judgment. In mindfulness practice, you learn to observe your thoughts, emotions, and sensations like mental weather phenomena. They appear, evolve, and disappear. You're not the storm, you're the sky in which the storm unfolds. Laboratory studies show impressive results. After 8 weeks of MBSR, participants show reduced reactivity to stressful images, better recovery after difficult cognitive tasks, and reduced systemic inflammation levels. Yes, psychological acceptance influences even your biological inflammation markers. Marshall Lineman, in developing dialectical behavior therapy for borderline disorders, introduced the concept of radical acceptance. It's completely and totally accepting reality as it is, particularly accepts you cannot change. Radical acceptance doesn't mean approving or agreeing with reality. You can radically accept that an injustice happened to you while working to change the system that allowed it. It's recognizing facts without adding a layer of denial or resistance that exhausts you. Linan proposes this reflection. Pain multiplied by resistance equals suffering. Pain is inevitable in human existence, but the suffering, this amplification of pain, shows how refusal to welcome it is optional. Radical acceptance requires courage and practice. It's a renewed choice, sometimes minutes by minutes, to face what is richer than getting lost in what should be. Understanding acceptance theoretically is one thing, practicing it is another. Let's explore the major obstacles that prevent us from accepting and how to navigate them. The most common obstacle is confusion between acceptance and resignation. As we talked before, many think accepting means giving up, passively submitting, or approving an unacceptable situation. It's exactly the opposite. Resignation is passive and taken with despair. I can't do anything. I must endure. Acceptance is active and rooted in lucidity. Here's what is. What can I do from this reality? Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Nazi concentration camp survivor, perfectly illustrated this distinction in his book Man's Search for Meaning. He describes how some prisoners radically accepted their situation while maintaining their dignity and inner freedom. They couldn't control the external conditions, but they chose their attitude toward these conditions. This distinction is crucial. Accepting a disease diagnostic doesn't mean giving up treatment. On the contrary, it's ceasing to waste your energy denying the disease to direct it toward care and adaptation. Studies on patients with chronic disease consistently show that those who practice acceptance have better quality of life and better treatment adherence. Our modern Western culture highly values control. We're taught that we can and must master everything, our emotions, our environment, our destiny. This is partly a costly illusion. Psychologist Julian Roger developed the concept of locus of control, internal versus external. An internal locus is believing your actions determine outcomes. This is generally adaptive, but pushed to the extreme, it becomes the illusion of total control, which generates anxiety and guilt when things effectively accepted your control. Wisdom resides in what's called serenity prayer. often attributed to the theologian Reynold Niebuhr, having the courage to change what I can change, the serenity to accept what I cannot change, and the wisdom to distinguish between the two. Research shows that chronic anxiety is often fueled by attempts to control the uncontrollable. You can control whether you will have a panic attack, but you can't control how you respond when it occurs. You can control which thoughts arise, but you can control whether you cling to them or let them pass. Stephen Hayes identified experiential avoidance as one of the central pathological processes in psychopathology. It's the tendency to avoid, suppress, or escape unpleasant internal experience, even when this avoidance creates long-term problems. A classic example, social anxiety. The person avoids social situations to not feel anxiety. Short term, it works. No social situation, no anxiety. But long term, this strategy maintains and reinforces the disorders. The person never learns that anxiety naturally diminishes, that social situations aren't as dangerous as anticipated, and their world progressively shrink. Avoidance can take subtle forms: constant distraction, hyperactivity, substance use, impulsive behaviors. All these strategies aim at not feeling what's emotionally present. The fundamental problem with avoidance is that it works short term, but fails long term. This is what makes it so trapping. Each time you successfully avoid an uncomfortable emotion, you reinforce the pattern. Your brain learns this emotion is dangerous. It must be avoided. Longitudinal studies show that people with high experiential avoidance develop more anxiety, depressive, and substance-related disorders. Conversely, those who better tolerate emotional discomfort have better long-term mental health, even facing significant stressors. We tend to identify with our thoughts, to take them as reality rather than mental representation. This is cognitive fusion. When your mind says, I'm worthless, you don't think, I have the truth that I'm worthless. You simply believe you are worthless. This fusion makes acceptance difficult because if your thoughts are reality, how can you accept a reality where you're effectively worthless or in danger? Diffusion, learning to observe your strokes as strokes, creates the space necessary for acceptance. A simple diffusion technique: repeat a difficult word for you, like failure, rapidly for 30 seconds. After a few repetitions, the word loses its emotional weight and becomes just a sound. This demonstrated how language creates our psychological reality. Sometimes we don't realize how much resistance costs us. It consumes enormous cognitive and emotional energy. It's like holding a beach ball underwater, possible, but exhausting and requiring constant vigilance. Research on throat control shows that attempting to suppress unwanted throat creates an ironic monitoring effect. Part of your mind must constantly monitor whether the forbidden throat appears, which paradoxically keeps it accessible. You create exactly what you're trying to avoid. Moreover, chronic resistance is physically costly. Prolonged maintenance of sympathetic nervous system activation contributes to hypertension, digestive troubles, immune problems, and accelerated aging. Your body pays the price of your mental struggle. So let's now move to practical application: how to cultivate acceptance in daily life. Here are scientifically validated exercises. Start with this simple practice. Several times a day, take 2 minute pauses. Observe your present experience, bodily sensations, emotion, thoughts, without trying to change anything. Simply name what you observe. I notice tension in my shoulders. I notice a worried thought about the project. I notice tightness in my chest. No, I shouldn't be tense. Or this thought is stupid. Just factual observation. This exercise trains metacognition, the ability to observe your mental process. With practice, you create space between stimulus and response. This space is freedom. A University of Wisconsin study showed that 10 daily minutes of this exercise for 2 weeks significantly reduce emotional reactivity and improve in attentional regulation. Then the expansion technique. Faced with a difficult emotion, the natural tendency is to contract, to tense up. Expansion is the opposite. Imagine the emotion as energy in your body. Instead of pushing it away, create space around it. Physically locate the emotion. Anxiety in the chest, anger in the belly. Observe these precise sensations. Heat, pressure, vibration. Breathe into this area. Imagine creating space around the sensation as if your body were expanded to accommodate it. This technique uses a principle of physiology. Tension aggravated emotion, relaxation allows its passage. By making room for the emotion, you signal to your nervous system that there is no immediate danger, which triggers the soothing parasympathetic response. Research in emotion-focused therapy confirms that this approach reduces emotional intensity more effectively than distraction or suppression. The hands as stroke exercise. Here is a powerful practice for cognitive diffusion. Imagine your negative thoughts are written on your hands. Put your hands in front of your face, palms towards you, close enough to block your view. Your thoughts completely obstruct your vision of the world. Now, while keeping your hands visible, slowly move them away. Your strokes are still there, you see them, but they no longer block your field of vision. You can see around them. Continue moving them away until your hands are in your peripheral vision. This physical metaphor is related to diffusion. Strokes don't disappear, but their relationship to you changes. They no longer occupy all your mental space. So next is the RAIN practice. Developed by psychologist Tara Brach, RAIN is an acronym for 4 steps of acceptance. The R is for recognize. Recognize what's happening. I'm experiencing hunger. Rated that I am hungry. This linguistic distinction creates distance. The A is for allow. Allow the experience to be there. Say internally, yes, you can be here, to the emotion. It's counterintuitive, but so powerful. The I is for investigate. Investigate with curiosity and compassion. Where do I feel this in my body? What is the emotion trying to tell me? The N is for nurture. Nurture with kindness. Please hand on your heart. Speak to yourself as to a dear friend. This is difficult right now. It's no more to feel this way. A clinical study on rain showed significant improvements for anxiety and depression after just 4 weeks of 15 minutes daily practice. Next one is acceptance of physical sensations. Much psychological distress is accompanied by uncomfortable bodily sensations. Learning to accept these sensations reduces anxiety around them. The exercise. Voluntarily provoke an uncomfortable but harmless sensation. Hold an ice cube in your hand. Observe the sensations. Intense cold, tingling, then numbness. Notice the urge to let go. Stay present with the discomfort a few seconds longer than your first impulse would want. This exercise trains distress tolerance. You learn viscerally that discomfort can be present without being dangerous, and that you can tolerate it longer than your strokes. Studies on receptive exposure show these exercises reduce anxiety about bodily sensations, particularly useful for panic disorders where fear of physical sensations create a vicious cycle. Next one is acceptance journaling. Writing is a so powerful tool for cultivating acceptance. Each evening, Take just 10 minutes to write about these three questions. First one, what did I resist today? What thought, emotion, or situation did I try to avoid or to control? Second one is what did this resistance cost me in energy, time, presence? And the last one, how could I have responded with more acceptance? What would I have been different? Expressive writing activates different brain areas than simple rumination. It creates narrative coherence, helps process emotions, and consolidate learning. Psychologist James Pennebaker has shown that writing about emotional experience even improves human function markers. Next one is value practice. Acceptance finds its meaning in values-guided action. Identify three fundamental values for you, not goals, but direction. Being a present parent, cultivating honesty, contributing to my community. Each day, ask yourself, faced with this discomfort I'm feeling, what action aligned with my value can I take? Even small. Accepting anxiety becomes easier when it allows you to act in coherence with what truly matters to you. Research shows that living in accordance with one's values is one of the most powerful predictors of psychological well-being, far more than reducing anxious and depressive symptoms. Self-compassion as foundation is the next one. Christine Neff, pioneering researcher on self-compassion, insists on this point. Acceptance without self-kindness can become cold and detached. Self-compassion includes three essential components. First, self-kindness rather than harsh judgment. Speaking to yourself as you would speak to a dear friend going through difficulty. Then, common humanity rather than isolation, recognizing that suffering, imperfection, and inadequacy as part of shared human experience. You're not alone in your struggle. So finally, mindfulness rather than over-identification, observing your struggle and emotions without amplifying or suppressing them. Studies show that self-compassion is strongly correlated with resilience, well-being, and intrinsic motivation. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't encourage complacency, but rather self-acceptance that enable authentic growth. And the last one is visualization exercise, the sky and the weather. One of my favorite, personally. Settle comfortably. Close your eyes. Imagine you are a vast open sky. Thoughts, emotion, and sensations are like weather phenomena crossing the sky. Sometimes there's sunshine, brilliant joy, sometimes heavy clouds of sadness, sometimes violent storms of anger, sometimes fog of uncertainty. But you are the sky, vast, spacious, unaltered by the weather crossing it. Good can hurt the sky. The storm can destroy the sky. Everything passes, everything changes, but the sky remains. Your pure consciousness, your capacity for observation, remains intact whatever the internal weather. This visualization anchors the self as context, perspective with discussed. It creates a deep sense of space and inner security. So we have reached the end of the journey into the meanders of acceptance. What should we take from all this? Acceptance is not a destination, but a continuous practice. It's not something you master once and for all, but an orientation you choose moment by moment. Some days will be easier, others more difficult. This is normal and part of the process. What's remarkable in the research we've explored in the convergence between ancient wisdom and modern science. Contemplative traditions have spoken of acceptance for millennia. Now neuroscience, clinical psychology, and behavioral medicine confirm and specify these teachings. We now know that acceptance physically modifies your brain, strengthens emotional regulation circuits, and activates certain physiological responses. We understand the precise mechanisms by which resistance maintains suffering and how acceptance dissolves it. But this intellectual knowledge is enough. Acceptance is an embodied skill that develops through practice. Like learning a musical instrument or a sport, it requires repetitions, patience, and kindness towards yourself in the learning process. Start small. Choose one practice among those we've explored. 2 minutes daily of observation without judgment is an excellent start. Practice daily for at least 2 weeks before evaluating results. Neuroplasticity takes time. Be attentive to traps. Watch for the tendency to use acceptance as a new form of distinguished control. If I accept my anxiety, it will disappear. This is no longer acceptance, but a subtle avoidance strategy. Accepting means letting go of the outcome. Remember that acceptance doesn't mean passively accepting everything in your life. Some situations must be changed. Some boundaries must be set. Some injustice must be fixed. Acceptance gives you the clarity and the energy for these necessary actions by freeing you from the internal struggle that exhausts you. Acceptance is ultimately an act of radical courage. It's choosing to face the full reality of your experience rather than living in avoidance and contraction. It's trusting your fundamental capacity to endure, to feel, to be fully human, in all the richness and complexity this implies. The ultimate paradox in this, by ceasing to struggle to eliminate your suffering, you often discover it naturally transforms. By making room for all your experience, you find a psychological freedom deeper than anything control could offer. I invite you to experiment, to explore, and to discover yourself what acceptance can bring you. Be curious, be passionate, and above all, be kind to yourself in the process. Thank you for accompanying me in this exploration. I hope these perspectives and practice will be useful to you in your own journey. Take care of yourself, and until next time, stay present, stay curious, and stay open to what is. Thanks, guy. See you later.